When you think of the most remote national park in the United States, what do you think of? For some, you might think of the vast, empty deserts of southern Utah, perhaps the backcountry of Canyonlands or Capitol Reef National Park. Some of you might think of the high-elevation, desolate wilds of Yellowstone or the roadless wilderness of the North Cascades. Most of you are probably thinking about Alaska. Its parks are famously remote, rugged, and wild, often requiring bush plains and pure human ingenuity to access. The frozen tundras of Gates of the Arctic and Kobuk Valley are indeed some of the most remote places in the United States. But what if I told you that none of those places are the most remote national park in America? What if I told you that in order to find the most remote national park in America, you'd have to travel more than 5,000 miles from the mainland United States, more than 2,500 from Hawaii, to one of only two pieces of US territory south of the equator, to a tiny set of volcanic rocks smack dab in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean? Only then will you find the most remote national park in America, the National Park of American Samoa. Now, when I say most remote, I'm referring to like a distance from a major population center. I think we can all agree that the Alaska parks are probably more wild than American Samoa. They don't have any access to food, shops, restaurants, hotels, that sort of thing, all of which are readily available in American Samoa. But the most remote Alaska parks are only really a couple hundred miles from a major population center, Anchorage, whereas American Samoa is nearly 2,000 miles from one, Auckland, New Zealand. So that's what I mean by remote, and it feels remote to go to American Samoa. It is a challenge to get here. The only flights that will take you here from the US leave from Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a 5-hour flight from Hawaii, which is already the most isolated island chain on Earth. And oh yeah, the flight only runs 2 or 3 times a week. And that only gets you to the main island of Tutuila, where one part of the park is. If you want to visit the Manua Islands of Ofu or Ta'u, where the rest of the park is, some say the real park, you'll have to then get on a tiny little twin turboprop plane that only runs twice a week, might get canceled because of the weather and leave you stranded for multiple days with no warning, and has very strict weight limits because if the plane is too heavy, it literally might not be able to slow down in time and run you right off the runway. There is a reason that among people who really love visiting national parks, AmSam is the one they either never make it to, or it's the one that they make it to last. The park even has special certificates for people for whom AmSam is the last of the big 63 parks that they have visited. Anyway, I say all of this to say that the National Park of American Samoa is very difficult to visit. But I went in January earlier this year, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that if you make the effort to visit the National Park of American Samoa, you will be rewarded with one of the most spectacular national park experiences you will ever have. It is, in my opinion, the most unique national park in America. And not just among the big 63 either, but across the entire 433 units of the national park system. I know that's a big claim, but let me tell you why I think that. To better understand this park, we'll start, as we often do on this channel, with a history lesson. The Samoan archipelago itself has, according to current archaeological evidence, been inhabited by human beings since around 1000 BCE, when it was discovered and occupied as part of the Polynesian expansion. Over time, a distinct Samoan way of life and culture developed, today known as Fa'a Samoa, which emphasizes respect for one's family, the land, and village life. Europeans made first contact here in the early 18th century, but it wasn't until the early 19th century that extensive interactions came to the islands in the form of missionaries from London. They introduced Christianity to the islands, which continues to be a major feature of Samoan life still to this day. Fast forward to the turn of the 20th century, and the world is changing. It is rapidly industrializing, and the world's major economic players are scrambling for power, influence, and territory through colonial expansion. The Samoan Islands, of course, do not escape this influence. In particular, the natural harbor of Pongo Pongo on the island of Tutuila is seen as a strategically important asset, and the colonial powers of the United States, Germany, and Great Britain all vie for it. Eventually, in 1899, the Treaty of Berlin is signed, dividing the islands in two as colonial possessions of the Western world. The larger Western islands fall under German control, while the smaller Eastern islands fall under US control. The Western islands remain in German control until World War I, after which they become a protectorate of New Zealand. They are then the first Pacific island nation to gain their independence in 1962. The Eastern Islands, though, as we know, remain under the jurisdiction of the United States still to this day. American Samoa is classified as a territory of the United States and is one of 5 inhabited territories the U.S. administers, along with Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. However, unlike those other 4 territories, American Samoa falls under a unique classification of American insular territory known as an unincorporated and unorganized territory. Unincorporated means that not all parts of the U.S. Constitution apply here, and unorganized means that Congress has so far failed to pass an official organic act, which sets up like the framework laws and powers for how the territory should be run. Basically, because of this, American Samoa operates on a very unique political system within the larger experiment that is the United States political system. They have a lot of autonomy. For instance, they have their own constitution, adopted in 1967. They have their own legislature and court system and an executive, the territorial governor. They even have their own immigration system. If you are an American citizen, you actually have to get your passport stamped when you arrive here, like I did. So, as a territory, American Samoa has a decent amount of leeway in terms of how it wants to run its own internal affairs. But American Samoans are not citizens. They are technically considered to be US nationals, but not citizens. And the question of citizenship is actually a contentious one in American Samoa today. There are those who support birthright citizenship for American Samoans, claiming it denies them voting rights, like voting for president, and the ability to work certain government jobs, for instance. However, it is actually the official position of the government of American Samoa to oppose birthright citizenship for American Samoans, and many Samoans themselves oppose birthright citizenship. They feel that if American Samoans were to be granted citizenship, they would lose a lot of the privileges they currently enjoy as a relatively autonomous territory of the United States. In particular, they feel it would threaten their unique land ownership customs. They see what happened in a place like Hawaii, where natives were dispossessed of a lot of their land, and want to avoid that fate. They feel that not having citizenship and preserving their autonomy better enables them to preserve their local land ownership customs. Now, if I haven't lost you yet, here is where we are finally going to tie things back into the National Park of American Samoa and why I think it is the most unique national park in America. See, most land in American Samoa, 90% in fact, is what's considered to be native-owned. Native-owned land operates under a communal ownership model whereby extended family groups called ainga collectively own and manage village land. This communal ownership model is a key aspect of Fa'a Samoa, or the Samoan way. These are the culture, customs, beliefs, traditions, and language that define the Samoan way of life. Fa'a Samoa is what it means to be Samoan. Under Fa'a Samoa, communal land ownership is seen as a way of caring for the land and sharing in the bounty of the land and understanding the interconnectedness of the land with the Samoan people. And according to American Samoan laws, in order to preserve this communal land ownership model, to preserve the Samoan way of life, no native land in American Samoa can be transferred to anyone who is not at least 100% Samoan by blood. That can be for American Samoans and independent Samoans alike. So basically, these laws apply to 90% of the land in American Samoa, communally owned land. You can probably see where this is going. The National Park Service, obviously, is not 100% Samoan by blood, meaning it would be impossible for them to own the land that would be necessary to create a national park. That is a problem, because this is how national parks work. If you've been to basically any other national park site in America, the federal government owns the land on which that park is located. or at least some of it. Even in parks where there's a mixture of ownership situations, say state, private, local, etc., the federal government still owns at least some of the land for every national park site in America, except at National Park of American Samoa, because of the communal ownership laws here. Let me explain how this works. So the idea for this park originally came about out of a desire to protect American Samoa's fruit bats and their paleotropical rainforest habitat. There are 2 species of fruit bats in American Samoa, the Samoan fruit bat, found only on the Samoan archipelago and Fiji, and the Tongan fruit bat, which has a wider dispersal across the Pacific. Both of these bats are absolutely massive, with wingspans of around 3 feet, and they're also iconic species in American Samoa. There were concerns that these bats and their habitat were under threat from overhunting, and that a national park effort could help protect and conserve them. So, in 1986, the National Park Service conducted a feasibility study to analyze the possibility of a national park in American Samoa, and they recommended that not only should a national park be created to preserve the fruit bats in the rainforest, but that it should also encompass marine areas and should also work to protect and interpret the archaeological and cultural resources of the islands to protect the Samoan way of life. They identified 2,800 acres of quote-unquote undisturbed native rainforest and 9 miles of coastline on the island of Tutuila and 5,400 acres on the island of Ta'u in the Manua Islands. This study was conducted with extensive consultation with elected officials, government agencies, academics, and most importantly, the Matai, or the local chiefs. Generally speaking, the study was well received, and the people of American Samoa were supportive of a national park on their islands. And so, in 1988, a bill was introduced by the then representative from American Samoa, Fofo Iosefa Fitisunia, to create the National Park of American Samoa. But the land ownership situation, as we have discussed, proved a hurdle. The NPS could not acquire the land on which the park was supposed to sit, which is why 5 years later, in 1993, the National Park Service entered into a novel 50-year lease agreement with 8 local villages on 2 different islands, and then 2 more villages on Ofu and Olosenga would be added to the agreement in 2002. That's right, folks. The National Park of American Samoa is rented. This is the only agreement of its kind in the entirety of the national park system, at least that I can find, and it is why I think the National Park of American Samoa is the most unique national park in America. But I also think that uniqueness extends beyond just the scenery and the land management agreement itself. Yes, administratively and legally speaking, the fact that the National Park of American Samoa is rented is literally unheard of in the national park system. It is also the only national park site south of the equator and the only national park site to contain both paleotropical rainforest and Indo-Pacific coral reefs. But think about what this agreement also represents, what it symbolizes. The entire reason this agreement was put in place at all was because the communal ownership structure of American Samoa is central to the Samoan way of life. It is central to what it means to be Samoan. Communal ownership views the land as a shared resource and as something these Samoan people are interconnected with. If the Park Service had outright acquired the land, they immediately would have been disrupting one of the core tenets of the very culture they were going to be tasked with protecting. The fact that we now have a national park that is leased rather than owned shows a commitment to truly protecting that interconnectedness and that relationship and that culture. The National Park of American Samoa is one of a kind in more ways than one, and expands our understanding of what a national park could and should be. It shows us a different way of doing things. It puts the human relationship with nature front and center, reminds us of our place in the natural world, that we, in fact, are not distinct from nature, but that we are intimately and inescapably linked with it. That is the Samoan way, and it is why the National Park of American Samoa is truly unique. Now, I can hear all of you screaming at your screens right now because I haven't addressed the elephant in the room. What happens when the 50-year lease runs out? It was signed in 1993, meaning the agreement ends in 2043. just 18 short years from now? Well, two things can happen, essentially. One, the lease could simply be renewed for another 50 years and the park continues operating as normal. Or the lease could not be renewed, in which case the land would revert back to the American Samoan government, who could either continue to run the park itself or simply return the land to the current landowners. At least I think that's what would happen based on my reading of the lease agreement, but I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I've linked it in the description if you want to go and fact check me on that. Essentially, though, neither I nor anybody else knows what will happen in 18 years. As far as I can tell, there haven't been any discussions on the matter, and really, we just have to wait 18 years to see what happens to the National Park of American Samoa. Guys, this park basically lives rent-free in my head. It's been almost 10 months since I got back from American Samoa, and I still think about it on a weekly basis. It is such a special place that I will truly never forget. It is unlike any other national park you will ever go to. And my advice to you, should you choose to go on this adventure, is simply to embrace it. It is a very non-traditional national park experience. There isn't a lot of tourist infrastructure here. The trail system is fairly small and not very well developed. It takes some effort to get to, but just remember, embrace Fa'a Samoa. Embrace the Samoan way of life. Connect with this place and with these people, and you will have a great time. Also, it can be kind of hard to find a lot of info about visiting this park, so if you'd like to learn more about how I did it, all the planning and logistics and all that stuff, might I suggest the trip report I wrote about it over on my Patreon. I make all of my trip reports available for just $2 per month or $24 per year. I have a trip report for every national park trip I've ever taken since I started this channel, which amounts to 36 different write-ups covering over 100 different parks. They are chock full of my experiences and advice, and I personally think they're the best value I offer over on Patreon. Again, just $2 a month. You can also get Discord access at that tier. Just saying, we're currently running a Fat Bear Week bracket competition in there. It's getting pretty heated, and it's pretty awesome. We'd love to have you. Plus, direct support on Patreon helps me keep cranking out these videos for you guys and helps me keep educating people about the wonders of our national parks. Check it out over at patreon.com/nationalparkdiaries. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.